The White King toppled sideways across the board, porcelain clicking against marble, and the entire court fell silent. Fiona Harper's hand still hovered above the queen she'd just moved, her fingers trembling slightly as she realized what she'd done. 9 moves. She'd beaten the Vampire King in 9 moves, and judging by the expressions on every pale, beautiful face surrounding her, no one in this candlelit chamber had seen that coming. Least of all the vampire sitting across from her. Jorah Ozvald didn't move. His white hair fell forward as he stared at the fallen piece, shadows from the candelabras dancing across features that could have been carved from ice. His fingers, long and elegant, remained frozen where they'd been resting against the table's edge. For a moment, Fiona wondered if vampires could actually turn to stone, because he looked like a statue of some ancient god, beautiful and terrible and completely still. Then he lifted his eyes to meet hers, and Fiona's heart forgot how to beat. They were silver, actual silver, like moonlight on water, and they held an intensity that made her want to look away and lean closer all at once. His expression was unreadable, aristocratic features giving away nothing, but something flickered in those impossible eyes that sent heat rushing through her veins. "Checkmate," she whispered, because someone had to say it. The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it transformed his face from coldly beautiful to devastatingly striking. So it would seem. His voice was silk and smoke, carrying that faint accent she couldn't quite place. European, certainly, but older than any country she could name. He rose from his chair with fluid grace, and Fiona's breath caught as she was reminded exactly how tall he was, how powerful, despite his lean build. His suit was impeccably tailored, black on black, and he moved like violence barely contained in elegant packaging. "Your Majesty," someone gasped from the gallery of courtiers watching their game. An older vampire with elaborate braids and a crimson gown stepped forward, her face pale even by vampire standards. Surely there was some mistake? Perhaps the human doesn't understand the proper rules. Fiona bristled. "I understand chess perfectly well." "Countess Sylvana." Jorah's voice cut through the room like a blade, soft but absolute. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The Countess froze mid-step. "Miss Harper played flawlessly. There was no mistake, save my own complacency." He turned back to Fiona, and that almost smile returned. "You're quite good." "You're quite not," Fiona replied before she could stop herself. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Fiona felt every vampire in the room focus on her with predatory attention, but she refused to shrink. She'd been dragged to this ridiculous gathering by her roommate Sarah, who was dating some vampire named Marcus, and thought it would be educational for Fiona to see how the other half lived. The court beneath the city, the hidden world of immortals playing their endless political games in converted ballrooms and throne rooms carved from ancient stone. She'd expected pretension. She'd expected danger. She hadn't expected to be challenged to chess by a king who played like someone going through the motions. Jorah laughed. Actually laughed, the sound rolling through the chamber like distant thunder. Several courtiers gasped. The Countess Sylvana looked faint. "No," he agreed, his silver eyes dancing with something that might have been delight. "I'm quite not good at all, it seems." He placed one hand over his heart, the gesture somehow both mocking and sincere. "I find myself devastated by this loss." "You look devastated," Fiona said dryly, noting his relaxed posture and the amusement playing at the edges of his expression. "I am excellent at hiding my pain." He gestured at the board between them, pieces scattered in the aftermath of her victory. "I must insist on a rematch." "Now?" "Tomorrow night." His gaze held hers. "I cannot allow such a defeat to stand without attempting to reclaim my dignity." Fiona knew she should say no. She'd only come tonight as a favor to Sarah, had only accepted the chess challenge because refusing a Vampire King seemed like a bad survival strategy. She should go home, back to her normal life, her graduate studies in mathematics, her quiet apartment far from this world of immortals and danger. But the way he was looking at her made her pulse race, like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve, a challenge he hadn't expected to find, like she'd surprised him, and he wanted more. "Fine," she heard herself say. "Tomorrow night, same time, same board." His smile was real this time, sharp and pleased. "I shall count the hours." It was only later, when Sarah was driving them home through rain-slicked streets, that Fiona realized she'd just agreed to return to a vampire court, voluntarily, to play chess with a king who commanded a hidden world she barely understood. "That was insane," Sarah said, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Nobody beats Jorah like that. Nobody beats him at all, actually. He's been playing chess for 600 years. "Then he should be better at it," Fiona muttered, but her hands were shaking in her lap. Adrenaline was finally catching up with shock. "Marcus says the court is going to lose their minds. Apparently there's been some tension lately about succession, power plays, that kind of thing. And you just publicly embarrassed their king." "He didn't seem embarrassed." "No," Sarah agreed slowly. "He didn't, did he? He seemed interested." Fiona closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the windshield wipers fill the silence. She could still see those silver eyes across the chessboard, still feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch. She'd spent her whole life being invisible, the quiet girl who was better with numbers than people, who found patterns more interesting than parties. Jorah Ozvald had looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in his very long life. She was definitely going back tomorrow. The next night, Fiona dressed more carefully than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was about fitting in, about not looking like an outsider in a room full of immortal aristocrats. She absolutely was not thinking about silver eyes and sharp smiles when she chose the deep blue dress that Sarah swore made her look stunning. "You're thinking about silver eyes and sharp smiles," Sarah said knowingly as they descended the hidden stairs that led to the court's entrance beneath an abandoned cathedral. "I know that look." "I'm thinking about chess strategy," Fiona lied. "Sure you are." The court looked different tonight, more crowded, more electric with tension. Vampires in elaborate period dress mingled with others in modern couture, all of them radiating that otherworldly beauty and barely concealed danger that marked their kind. Conversation stopped as Fiona entered. Eyes tracked her movement across the marble floors. She lifted her chin and walked like she belonged there. Jorah waited in the same chamber as before, the chessboard already set up between two chairs. He stood by a window that looked out onto an impossible garden, something that shouldn't exist this far underground, but somehow did. When he turned at her approach, Fiona's breath caught. He wore deep crimson tonight, the color striking against his white hair and pale skin. The suit looked antique, but perfectly maintained, probably older than her entire bloodline. He should have looked like a costume, pretentious and overdone. Instead, he looked like exactly what he was, a king. "You came," he said, and something in his voice suggested he'd wondered if she would. "I don't break promises." Fiona settled into her chair, noting the way he moved to his own seat with that impossible grace. "Ready to lose again?" His laugh was quieter tonight, more intimate in the relative privacy of the chamber. Courtiers watched from the doorway, but none entered without permission. "Your confidence is refreshing. Most humans are terrified to speak so boldly to my kind. Most humans probably have better survival instincts than I do. Or perhaps you simply see more clearly than they do." He gestured at the board. "White or black? You choose." He selected black without hesitation, giving her the first move advantage. Fiona studied the board, then opened with a different strategy than the night before. She'd spent hours today analyzing their previous game, trying to understand how he played, where his weaknesses lay. He was too aggressive with his knights, she'd realized, too confident in direct attacks while overlooking subtle positioning. It spoke to how he'd probably learned chess centuries ago when the game was more about warfare than strategy. They played in silence for the first several moves, the only sound the quiet click of pieces against marble. Fiona could feel his attention on her like heat, studying not just the board, but her face, her hands, the small expressions she couldn't quite hide when she saw an opening. "You're a student," he said finally, his voice not breaking her concentration. "Sarah mentioned you're pursuing advanced mathematics." "Applied mathematics," Fiona corrected, moving her bishop. "Pattern recognition and predictive modeling." "Ah, that explains your approach." He countered her move smoothly. "You play chess like you're solving an equation. Isn't that what it is? Variables and outcomes, probability and positioning. For some, perhaps." His silver eyes met hers over the board. "I learned chess is war. Every piece a soldier, every move a battle." "That's why you're losing," Fiona said, then winced. "Sorry, that was rude." "That was honest." He didn't look offended. If anything, he seemed even more intrigued. Tell me, you play like you're trying to dominate the board instead of control it. Aggression over strategy. It probably worked well in actual warfare, but in chess, she moved her queen into position. Chess rewards patience. And you are patient. When it matters. He studied the board for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. When he made his next move, it was more careful, more considered. Fiona felt a flutter of excitement. He was adapting, learning from her criticism instead of dismissing it. The game stretched longer than their first, an hour, then two. Pieces fell on both sides. The watching courtiers grew restless, whispered among themselves. Fiona ignored them, lost in the beautiful complexity of the game, the way Jorah's strategy evolved as they played. He was brilliant, she realized. 600 years of experience focused and refined into each decision. But she was still better. Checkmate, she said softly, almost reluctantly, as her rook sealed his fate. Jorah stared at the board for a long moment, then released a breath that might have been laughter or exasperation. You're going to ruin my fearsome reputation. You demanded a rematch. So I did. He met her eyes, and the intensity there stole her breath. Tomorrow night? Are you a glutton for punishment? Perhaps I simply enjoy the company. His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the audience. It has been a very long time since anyone challenged me, Fiona Harper. In chess or otherwise. Her name in his mouth sounded like poetry and danger. Fiona knew she should be afraid, should recognize this for what it was, a vampire king's focused attention, probably nothing good. But all she felt was exhilarated, alive in a way she hadn't been in years. Tomorrow, she agreed. The pattern continued. Every night Fiona returned to the court beneath the city. Every night, she and Jorah played chess while courtiers watched and whispered. Every night, she won. But the games were growing longer, more complex. Jorah learned quickly, adapted his strategy, began anticipating her moves with increasing accuracy. What started as straightforward victories became hard-fought battles across the board. Fiona had to work for each win, had to push herself further than she'd ever gone before. She loved it. Between moves, they talked. Jorah asked about her research, her life, her views on everything from mathematics to philosophy. Fiona found herself asking him about history he'd lived through, the world from an immortal's perspective, what 6 centuries of existence had taught him. Patience, he said one night, his lips quirking at the irony, which you've already observed I lack in chess. But not in other things? Fiona moved her knight. I have learned to take the long view in most matters. Humans rush through their lives because they have so little time. We have endless time, so we learn to savor moments worth savoring. The way he looked at her when he said it made her pulse race. Is that what this is? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. A moment worth savoring? These games have become the highlight of my considerable existence, he said quietly. Make of that what you will. Fiona made her next move without seeing the board, lost in silver eyes and dangerous possibilities. It was Marcus who finally explained the danger she was in, though not the kind she'd expected. The court is splitting over you, he told her and Sarah one afternoon at their apartment, his normally calm demeanor showing cracks of worry. Half of them find Jorah's fascination with a human amusing. The other half considers it a sign of weakness. Weakness, Fiona set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. Because he plays chess with me? Because he loses to you, publicly, every single night. Marcus ran a hand through his dark hair. There are vampires who've been waiting centuries for any sign that Jorah might be vulnerable, unfit to rule. Countess Sylvana, Lord Theron, Lady Cassia, they're using these games as evidence that the king has lost his edge. That's insane. Chess is everything in Vampire Court, Marcus interrupted. It's a demonstration of strategic thinking, of power, of mental dominance. Kings who ruled for millennia have been overthrown for less, and Jorah doesn't just lose to you, he keeps coming back for more. Keeps putting himself in a position to be defeated again. Fiona's mind raced. He knows this. He has to know. Of course he knows. He doesn't care. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. You need to understand what that means. Jorah Ozvald has held this court for 300 years, through cunning, strength, and absolute unwillingness to show vulnerability. He's crushed rebellions, outlasted rivals, maintained power through sheer force of will. And now he's risking all of that because he's fascinated by a human woman who beats him at chess. Sarah touched Fiona's arm gently. He's falling for you. You have to see that. Fiona had seen it, had felt it in every lingering glance, every smile that softened his regal features. Every night he found excuses to extend their games with conversation. She'd been trying not to acknowledge it, trying not to examine her own racing heart when she entered the court and saw him waiting. "I can't stop going," she whispered. If he stops challenging me, they'll know it affected him even more. It'll look like retreat." "If you keep going, they might move against him." Marcus stood, pacing to the window. "There are rumors of a formal challenge. If enough of the old blood unite, they can force a trial of fitness. It hasn't been done in a century, but the law still stands." "What happens in a trial of fitness?" "Combat, strategy, tests designed to prove a king's capability to rule." Marcus turned back to her, his expression grim. "Jorah would win. He's the most powerful vampire I've ever known. But if they frame it right, if they make it about judgment rather than strength, his continued losses to you become evidence of compromised decision-making," Fiona finished. Her mathematical mind saw the pattern instantly, the way the pieces were being positioned against Jorah. Not a direct attack, but a careful undermining of his authority. Death by 1,000 cuts, each chess game another small wound to his reputation. She stood abruptly. "I need to see him." "Fiona, wait." But she was already grabbing her jacket, her mind racing through possibilities. She'd spent weeks learning how Jorah played chess, learning his patterns and strategies. It was time to apply that knowledge to a larger game. The court was less crowded than usual when she arrived that evening, early and unannounced. Fiona made her way through shadowed corridors she'd learned over countless visits toward the private chambers Marcus had once mentioned in passing. A guard stepped into her path. "The king is not receiving visitors. Tell him Fiona Harper is here. Tell him it's about the game." Something flickered in the guard's ancient eyes. He disappeared for a moment, then returned and gestured her forward. "He'll see you." Jorah's private study was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with volumes in a dozen languages. A fireplace crackled with real flames, unnecessary warmth but aesthetic perfection. Windows looked out onto that impossible underground garden, moonflowers blooming in defiance of natural law. He stood by the fireplace, still as sculpture, wearing simple black shirt and trousers that somehow made him look more regal than any formal wear. When he turned at her entrance, his expression was carefully neutral. "You're early," he said, "and we have no game scheduled for tonight. We need to talk." Fiona crossed the distance between them, refusing to be intimidated by his height or power or the intensity of his gaze. "About what's really happening here." "And what is really happening here, Fiona?" "You're being set up. The chess games, the public losses, they're using them against you." She watched his face, seeing no surprise there, only resignation. "You already know." "I've known from the first night." He moved to pour wine from a crystal decanter, offered her a glass. She took it with trembling fingers. "Sylvana and her faction have been positioning for a challenge for decades. Your victories simply gave them ammunition they'd have eventually found elsewhere." "Then why keep playing? Why keep inviting me back?" Fiona's voice rose despite her best efforts. "If you knew they'd use it against you, why risk cut?" "Because you're worth the risk," he interrupted quietly. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back or ignore. Fiona's breath caught. Jorah set down his wineglass with careful precision. "I have ruled this court for 3 centuries. I have made thousands of strategic decisions, sacrificed countless things for the sake of maintaining power. I have been cold and calculating and absolutely practical in all matters." He stepped closer, silver eyes holding hers with unbearable intensity. "And then you walked into my court and beat me at chess in 9 moves, looked at me without fear, spoke to me without deference, and I realized I had forgotten what it felt like to want something more than I wanted power." "Jorah." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You asked me once what I had learned in 600 years. Another step closer, until she could feel the cold air that surrounded him, the otherworldly presence that marked him as predator. "I learned that immortality without purpose is merely existing. I learned that power without passion is an empty crown. I learned to take the long view, to be patient, to wait for things worth having. His hand lifted to her face, fingers ghosting along her jaw with impossible gentleness. I learned to recognize extraordinary when I see it. Fiona's heart was thunder in her chest. I'm just a graduate student who's good at math. You're a woman who sees patterns where others see chaos, who challenges kings without flinching, who plays the most beautiful chess I've witnessed in 300 years. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the touch cool but not unpleasant. You're brilliant and brave, and completely unimpressed by immortality, and I have been falling for you since that first toppled king piece. She should pull away. Should remember he was a vampire, a predator, a being who'd lived more lifetimes than she could imagine. Should remember the danger, the court politics, all the sensible reasons this was impossible. Instead, she leaned into his touch and said, I've been falling for you too. His breath hitched, unnecessary air drawn in pure response. Then he was kissing her, cool lips against hers, gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. Fiona melted into him, into the contradiction of his touch, dangerous and tender, powerful and careful, immortal and achingly present in this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless for different reasons, Jorah rested his forehead against hers. This complicates things. When did you start caring about complications? Fiona's hands had found their way to his chest, feeling no heartbeat but sensing the strength beneath his shirt. The moment I realized I would burn this court to ash before I let them use you against me. There has to be another way. Fiona pulled back enough to meet his eyes. The trial of fitness Marcus mentioned. What exactly does it entail? Jorah's expression shifted, the king returning to his features. A series of challenges designed to prove fitness to rule. Combat is traditional, but the specifics are decided by the challengers. If they're clever, and Sylvana is very clever, they'll frame it around judgment and strategy rather than raw power. Then we beat them at their own game. Fiona's mind was already racing, seeing patterns, connections. They want to use chess as evidence of compromised thinking? Fine. We use chess to prove the opposite. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop playing each other. Fiona crossed to the window, staring out at the impossible garden while her thoughts crystallized. We start playing them, together. Jorah moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and cool at her shoulder. Explain. You said Vampire Court is all about chess, about strategic thinking. They're framing your losses to me as weakness, as failure. What if we reframe it as innovation? She turned to face him, excitement building as the plan took shape. You're not losing to a random human. You're learning from someone who approaches the game from an entirely different angle than any vampire ever could. Someone who's teaching you new strategies, expanding your thinking. Using a human consultant would be seen as... He paused, considering. Actually, it might be seen as quite clever, seeking knowledge from unconventional sources, adapting and evolving. Exactly. And when they challenge you, when they try to prove you're unfit, we demonstrate that you're actually stronger for having learned from me, that your judgment is better, sharper, more adaptable than it's been in centuries. Jorah was quiet for a long moment, silver eyes distant as he thought through the implications. Then a slow smile spread across his face, sharp and dangerous and absolutely devastating. You want to turn their own weapon against them. I want to checkmate them before they even realize the game has started. Fiona stepped closer, emboldened by the look in his eyes. But I can't do it alone. I need you to trust me, to let me see the real political landscape, every player, every alliance, every weakness in their position. You're asking to see the true court. His hand found hers, cool fingers interweaving with her warm ones. Not the performance we show outsiders, but the actual power structure. I'm asking to be your partner in this, Fiona said softly. Not just in chess, in everything. The weight of that statement settled between them, meaning more than politics or strategy. Jorah lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a vow. Then let's play to win. The next 3 weeks transformed Fiona's understanding of vampire politics from abstract concept to intricate reality. Jorah opened his world to her completely, holding nothing back. She attended court sessions where disputes were settled with elaborate ritual and barely veiled threats. She learned the histories of the major houses, the old grudges and ancient alliances that shaped every interaction. She discovered that vampire society was as much about theater as power, every gesture calculated, every word weighted with centuries of meaning. And she began to see the patterns. Sylvana isn't the real threat, she told Jorah one night in his study, surrounded by papers and genealogies. She's too obvious, too vocal in her opposition. She's a distraction. From what? Jorah looked up from the documents he'd been reviewing, giving her his full attention. From Lord Theron. Fiona pulled out the alliance map she'd been constructing, a web of connections between the court's major players. Look at his positions over the last 50 years. Every time there's been a challenge to your rule, every time someone is pushed for change, Theron has been 3 steps removed but perfectly positioned to benefit. He never leads rebellions. He lets others take that risk. Then, he emerges as the reasonable alternative when they fail. Jorah crossed to her side, studying the map with intensity. And Sylvana is his stalking horse. She makes noise, draws attention, maybe even believes she's the real threat. But if a trial of fitness is called, I'd bet anything Theron is the one who ends up as primary challenger. Because he's been building toward this for decades. Jorah's voice was quiet, impressed, positioning himself as the measured, stable alternative to both my rule and Sylvana's theatrics. Exactly. Fiona traced the connections with her finger. And he's good, really good. He's been patient, careful, never overplaying his hand. Under other circumstances, it might work. Under other circumstances, I wouldn't have you seeing patterns I've been too close to notice. Jorah's hand settled on her shoulder, warm weight despite his cool touch. How do we counter? We don't counter. We redirect. Fiona turned to face him, excitement building as the strategy crystallized. Theron's whole plan relies on him remaining above the conflict, the voice of reason, so we make him commit. We force him to show his hand early before he's ready. By making him think he's already won, Jorah finished, his sharp mind following her logic. If he believes the trial is certain, that my position is weak enough, his ambition will overcome his patience. And when he overreaches, when he moves too soon, Fiona smiled, we spring the trap. They worked deep into the night, refining the strategy, anticipating countermoves. It was like the most complex chess game imaginable, with centuries of history and dozens of players all moving across a board measured in power and blood. Fiona had never felt more alive, her mind working in perfect synchronization with Jorah's, 2 different perspectives combining into something greater than either could achieve alone. As dawn approached and Jorah walked her to the court's exit, he caught her hand and pulled her into a shadowed alcove. I need to ask you something, he said, his expression serious in the dim light. This plan, everything we're doing, it requires you to be deeply involved in court politics, visible, vulnerable. If things go wrong, if Theron or Sylvana decide to target you directly. I know the risks, Fiona interrupted gently. I'm not certain you do. His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Vampires play for keeps. They won't simply embarrass you or drive you away. If they see you as a true threat, they will try to kill you. Then we make sure they don't see me as a threat until it's too late. Fiona covered his hands with hers. I'm not backing down, not from this, not from you. Whatever happens, we face it together. You're terrifyingly stubborn, Jorah murmured, but there was warmth in his voice, affection mixed with exasperation. You're terrifyingly overprotective for someone who just spent 3 hours treating me as an equal strategic partner. I can hold both truths. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips with aching tenderness. You're my equal in every way that matters, and I will burn the world to keep you safe. Let's try to save the world burning for after we win, Fiona suggested, then kissed him back with enough passion to make him groan against her mouth. The trap was set in motion the following week, during a formal court gathering. Fiona attended on Jorah's arm, wearing a gown of deep emerald that Sarah had insisted made her look like royalty. The assembled vampires watched with undisguised interest as the king escorted a human through their midst, his attention focused solely on her. Let them stare, Jorah murmured, pitched for her ears alone. Let them see exactly how much you matter. They played chess that night, but differently than before. Instead of simply observing, Jorah discussed strategy openly with Fiona between moves. He asked her opinion on positions, acknowledged when her suggestions improved his game, treated her as consultant and partner rather than opponent. The assembled court watched with fascination as the game evolved into a conversation, two minds working in tandem. And when Jorah finally won, his first victory in all their games, the chess pieces positioned exactly as Fiona had suggested 3 moves prior, the political implications were impossible to miss. The king wasn't weakened by his association with the human, he was strengthened by it. Countess Silvana left the chamber early, her expression tight. Perfect. She'll go straight to Thrawn, Fiona whispered as she and Jorah reset the board. And he'll see opportunity. Jorah's eyes tracked the Countess's exit with predatory focus. He'll think I'm overconfident, showing my hand too soon. When really we're showing him exactly what we want him to see. Lord Theron made his move 2 days later, requesting a formal audience with the gathered court. He was elegant even by vampire standards, his white hair pulled back in a style 3 centuries out of date, his dark suit immaculate. When he spoke, his voice carried authority earned over a millennium of existence. "My king," he began, the title just formal enough to avoid direct insult. "It has come to the attention of several houses that concerns exist regarding the current governance of this court." Concerns? Jorah sat on his throne with perfect composure, looking every inch the regal immortal. Fiona stood to his right, positioned as advisor, her presence a statement of its own. Questions about judgment, about the wisdom of certain recent choices. Theron's gaze flickered to Fiona, dismissive and calculated. There are those who wonder if perhaps the weight of 3 centuries of rule has become burdensome. You're suggesting a trial of fitness. Jorah didn't make it a question. I'm suggesting that such a trial would allow you to demonstrate, publicly and without doubt, that you remain the strongest candidate to lead this court. Theron spread his hands, the gesture falsely conciliatory. Surely, if you're confident in your continued capability, you would welcome the opportunity to prove it. It was beautifully done. Refuse, and look weak. Accept, and walk into whatever challenges Thrawn had designed to make him fail. Fiona could see the trap, could see how carefully it had been constructed. She could also see the counter-trap, the pieces she and Jorah had spent weeks positioning. "I accept," Jorah said calmly. "Under traditional law, the challenger selects the trials. I assume you'll be acting as challenger, Theron?" The briefest pause. Theron had wanted someone else to take that role, to maintain his position above the conflict. But with Jorah forcing his hand, refusing to name any other candidate. "If necessary," Theron agreed smoothly, "though I take no pleasure in this obligation." "Of course not," Jorah's voice was dry. "Select your trials. I'll be ready." Theron announced them the following night before the assembled court. 3 challenges, each designed to test different aspects of fitness to rule. First, combat against a champion of the challenger's choosing, traditional, straightforward, meant to demonstrate physical capability. Second, resolution of a complex court dispute, judged by a panel of neutral elder vampires. This would test judgment and wisdom. Third, a game of strategic skill. Chess, naturally, against multiple opponents simultaneously. Fiona's heart raced as Theron laid out the trials. The first was standard, expected. The second was where they'd planted their advantage. The third was the killing stroke they'd been building toward. "These trials will take place over 3 nights, Thrawn concluded, "beginning tomorrow. Does the king accept these terms?" "I accept." Jorah stood, commanding every eye in the room. "With one modification." The court held its breath. "In the trial of judgment and in the chess trial, I wish to consult with my advisor." Jorah gestured to Fiona, "as is my right when dealing with court matters that benefit from expertise I might lack." Theron's expression flickered. He'd expected Jorah to refuse help, to let pride dictate his choices. Instead, the king was openly acknowledging Fiona's skill, leveraging her abilities rather than hiding them. "That is unusual," Theron said carefully. "But not forbidden," Jorah countered. "Unless you wish to add new restrictions to traditional law?" The challenge was clear. Change the rules now and appear desperate. Allow the consultation and watch your careful trap adapt in ways you hadn't anticipated. Theron smiled, thin and cold. No restrictions. If our king requires a human's assistance to demonstrate his fitness, that speaks for itself. The assembled vampires murmured. Some looked scandalized, others looked thoughtful. A few, Fiona noticed, looked at her with something like respect. "Then we begin tomorrow night," Jorah declared. "I look forward to demonstrating exactly how fit I am to rule." The first trial was pure spectacle. Theron had selected a warrior named Constantine as his champion, a vampire nearly as old as Jorah himself, known for brutal efficiency in combat. They fought in the traditional manner, hand-to-hand in a marked circle, first blood ending the match. Fiona watched from the gallery, her hands clenched tight enough to hurt, as Jorah moved like violence made beautiful. He was fast beyond mortal comprehension, strong enough to shatter stone with casual strikes, and utterly focused. Constantine was good, centuries of experience evident in every move. But Jorah was better. The fight lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, with Jorah's hand around Constantine's throat and enough pressure to draw a single drop of blood, the court erupted in approval. This was the king they knew, powerful and dangerous and absolutely dominant. Theron applauded politely, showing nothing but respect. But Fiona saw the calculation in his ancient eyes. He'd never expected Jorah to fail the combat trial. That had been about establishing baseline competence, making the other two trials seem more important by comparison. The real game started tomorrow. The second trial took place in the formal judgment chamber, a room designed for settling disputes too complex or important for lower courts. 3 elder vampires sat as judges: Lady Cassia, Lord Victor, and Countess Morella. All were old enough to remember when Jorah had taken power, all theoretically neutral, but carrying their own agendas. The dispute Theron had selected was fiendishly complicated. It involved 3 different vampire houses, conflicting claims to territory spanning 2 continents, blood feuds dating back 400 years, and at least a dozen previous rulings that had failed to resolve the matter. "You have 2 hours," Lady Cassia announced. "Present your judgment and the reasoning behind it." Jorah took his seat at the chamber's center, Fiona beside him. They discussed this trial extensively, but the specific case had been unknown until this moment. Now they had to analyze centuries of history, understand conflicting claims, and propose a solution that would satisfy the judges of Jorah's wisdom and fairness. Fiona immediately began sketching out the relationships on paper, creating visual maps of the territorial claims and blood connections. Her mathematical mind cut through the emotional weight of the feuds, seeing the underlying patterns of cause and effect. "The original dispute wasn't about territory," she murmured to Jorah. "That came later. Look at the timeline. The first conflict was about a marriage alliance that fell through." Jorah followed her analysis, his eyes sharpening. "Because House Dragomir promised their daughter to both House Valentin and House Corvus. Political hedging that backfired spectacularly." Fiona traced the consequences through her map. Every territorial dispute after that was really about the insult, the broken faith. The land just gave them something concrete to fight over. "So the solution isn't about dividing territory fairly," Jorah said slowly. "It's about addressing the original breach of honor." They worked in tandem, Fiona identifying patterns and connections, Jorah translating those insights into the cultural and political language of vampire society. By the time Lady Cassia called for their judgment, they had a solution that was elegant in its simplicity. Jorah stood before the judges and the assembled houses involved in the dispute. "The territorial claims will be set aside," he declared, "because the root of this conflict was never about land. It was about House Dragomir's failure to honor their word, and the insult that failure represented to both House Valentin and House Corvus." The representatives from those houses straightened, attention fully focused. "House Dragomir will formally acknowledge their error and offer reparations to both houses. Not land, which would simply continue the conflict, but a blood oath of alliance and support to be called upon once by each house at a time of their choosing." Jorah's voice carried absolute authority. This restores honor, provides tangible benefit, and creates future incentive for cooperation rather than continued conflict. The chamber was silent as the judges conferred. Finally, Lord Victor spoke. This is a creative solution, not traditional, but addressing the core issue rather than its symptoms. He looked at the three houses. Do you accept this judgment? After tense negotiation, all three agreed. The 400-year-old dispute was settled in a single night, with a solution none of them had considered before. Lady Cassia regarded Jorah with something like respect. Your judgment is sound, my king, and your consultation with your advisor was illuminating. Miss Harper sees patterns that centuries of traditional thinking might overlook, Jorah said, his hand finding Fiona's. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Theron's expression remained neutral, but Fiona caught the tightening around his eyes. The trial he'd designed to demonstrate questionable judgment had instead showcased adaptability and innovative thinking. His trap was turning against him. One more trial to go. The chess trial took place on the final night, in the grand chamber where Fiona had first beaten Jorah in 9 moves. But tonight, the setup was different. 3 boards were arranged in a triangle, each with a different opponent. Simultaneous play, Theron explained to the assembled court. His Majesty will face 3 masters at once, moving from board to board. Standard rules, standard time constraints. A king must be able to think strategically on multiple fronts. The opponents were introduced. Sylvana, predictably. Lord Marcus, a chess expert who'd held tournaments for 2 centuries. And, surprisingly, Theron himself. I thought you were meant to be the judge of this trial, Jorah observed. I'm confident in my ability to remain objective, regardless of the outcome. Theron smiled. Unless His Majesty objects? It was another trap. Object and appear afraid. Accept and face the very vampire who designed this trial specifically to make him fail. I have no objection, Jorah said smoothly, though I'll be consulting with Miss Harper between moves as established. Of course. Theron took his seat at one board. We wouldn't want our king to face these challenges without assistance. The games began. Fiona had never seen anything like it. Jorah moved from board to board with fluid grace, spending mere seconds on each move before proceeding to the next opponent. His mind had to hold 3 completely different games simultaneously, tracking positions and strategies without hesitation. It should have been impossible. Against masters of Theron's caliber, it should have ended in disaster. But Jorah wasn't facing them alone. Board 2, Fiona murmured as he completed a circuit. Marcus is setting up for a Queen's Gambit variation. He'll sacrifice his rook in 5 moves to crack your defense. Jorah nodded minutely, adjusting his strategy. At board 1, Sylvana was playing aggressively, trying to overwhelm him with speed. At board 3, Theron played with patient precision, waiting for exhaustion or distraction to create an opening. Fiona watched all 3 games at once, her pattern recognition abilities pushed to their absolute limit. She saw the strategies unfolding, saw the traps being laid, and whispered insights to Jorah as he circled the boards like a predator. They'd practiced this, though not with stakes this high. Nights in Jorah's study, playing against hypothetical opponents, learning to combine their abilities into something greater than either could achieve alone. Her analytical mind and his centuries of experience merged into a single devastating force. The games stretched into hours. Pieces fell on all boards. The watching court leaned forward, transfixed by the display of strategic brilliance unfolding before them. Sylvana fell first, her aggressive strategy backfiring when Jorah turned her own momentum against her. She stood from her board with a disgusted sound, conceding defeat. 1 down. Marcus lasted longer, his defensive play nearly impenetrable. But Fiona caught the pattern in his positioning, saw the subtle tell in how he protected his queen. She whispered the insight to Jorah, who immediately exploited the weakness. 15 moves later, Marcus's king toppled, 2 down. Only Theron remained. The chamber was utterly silent as Jorah settled across from his challenger, giving this final board his full attention. Fiona stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder, both of them studying the positions with intense focus. Theron had played a perfect game. His pieces were positioned flawlessly, his king protected by layers of defense. Over the hours of simultaneous play, while Jorah's attention had been divided, Theron had built a nearly unassailable position. This is impressive, Jorah said quietly. You've been planning this specific game for weeks, haven't you? Every move calculated in advance. A good strategist prepares for all contingencies, Theron replied. And yet you made one critical error. Fiona leaned forward, her eyes tracing the board. You assumed we wouldn't see it. Theron's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. I've made no error. Yes, you have. Jorah moved his knight, a piece Theron had surely dismissed as irrelevant 3 moves ago. You played for the board in front of you. We played for the entire room. Fiona felt the realization hit her like lightning. She'd been so focused on the chess games themselves that she'd missed the larger pattern. But Jorah had seen it, had been positioning for it from the very first trial. This wasn't about winning chess games. It was about demonstrating what kind of king Jorah was. Every challenge you set was designed to prove I rely too heavily on Miss Harper, Jorah continued, moving pieces with decisive precision, that I've become dependent, weakened by human influence. But what these trials actually demonstrated is that I'm strong enough to recognize expertise beyond my own, wise enough to seek counsel from unexpected sources, adaptable enough to evolve rather than stagnate. He moved his queen into position. You wanted to show the court I'm unfit to rule. Instead, you've shown them exactly why I've held power for 3 centuries, because I do whatever it takes to win. Checkmate, Fiona whispered, seeing the final sequence. Theron stared at the board for a long moment, then at Jorah, then at Fiona. Slowly, with the precision of someone who'd lived a millennium, he reached out and tipped his king. Checkmate, he agreed. The court erupted. Vampires who'd been silent observers for 3 nights suddenly filled the chamber with noise, argument, celebration. Fiona felt Jorah's hand find hers, squeezing gently. We won, she breathed. We won, he confirmed. Lady Cassia stood from her position with the other judges. The trials are complete. Jorah Ozvald has demonstrated fitness to rule in combat, in judgment, and in strategy. The challenge is answered. The king remains. Theron rose from his seat, expression carefully neutral. For a moment, Fiona wondered if he would contest the outcome, if centuries of planning would make him desperate. Then he bowed, the gesture formally correct. The challenge is answered, he repeated. Long live the king. It was over. The political threat, the succession crisis, all of it diffused through strategy and skill and the perfect combination of their abilities. Fiona should have felt relieved, triumphant, safe. Instead, she felt hollow. Because as the court celebrated and Jorah accepted congratulations from his supporters, reality crashed down with brutal clarity. The crisis was over. The game was won. There was no reason for her to keep coming to court every night, no reason for a vampire king to maintain his fascination with a human graduate student. No reason except the feelings neither of them had actually spoken aloud since that night in his study. Jorah found her later, after the celebrations had died down and most of the court had dispersed. She'd retreated to the garden chamber, staring at the impossible moonflowers and trying to make sense of the ache in her chest. You disappeared, he said softly, joining her by the window. Needed some air. Well, metaphorical air. We're underground. Fiona tried for a laugh that came out hollow. You were busy anyway. Lots of people wanting to congratulate the triumphant king. Fiona. His hand touched her shoulder, gentle pressure. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. She turned to face him, all her careful composure crumbling. We won, Jorah. The trials are over. The threat is gone. And I don't know what that means for this. For us. Understanding flickered in his silver eyes. You think now that the political need is resolved, I'll what? Return to my immortal life and forget you? You're a vampire king. I'm a human who helped you through a crisis. Fiona hated the tremor in her voice. Maybe what we felt was just adrenaline and proximity. Maybe now that the game is over. Jorah kissed her, sudden and fierce, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pulled her close. When he finally released her, both of them breathing hard, his expression was raw with emotion. Listen to me carefully, he said, voice low and intense. I'm 600 years old. I've experienced every possible variation of adrenaline and proximity. I know the difference between expedient alliance and genuine connection. His forehead pressed to hers, silver eyes blazing. What I feel for you isn't strategy or crisis response. It's love, Fiona. Absolute, inconvenient, world-altering love. Her breath caught. Jorah. I love your brilliant mind and your stubborn courage. I love the way you see patterns in chaos and call me out when I'm being an arrogant immortal." His hands framed her face with aching tenderness. "I love that you beat me at chess in 9 moves and changed my entire existence, and I will love you whether or not there's ever another political crisis, whether or not you ever set foot in this court again." Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks. "I love you too. God, I love you so much it terrifies me. Because I'm a vampire, because I'm dangerous, because you're immortal and I'm not." The truth she'd been avoiding crashed out. "You'll live centuries after I'm dust, Jorah. How can this possibly work when I have maybe 60 years left and you have forever?" His expression shifted, something careful and hopeful emerging. "What if you didn't? Have only 60 years, I mean." Fiona's heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that vampire law permits turning under specific circumstances. Love is one of them. Partnership is another. You've more than demonstrated both." Jorah's voice was steady, but his hands trembled against her face. "I'm saying I would like to offer you immortality if you want it. Not now, not rushed or pressured, but someday, when you've lived the human experiences you want to live. When you're ready. If you're ready." The possibility hung between them, enormous and terrifying and impossibly beautiful. Fiona had never seriously considered becoming a vampire, had thought of them as utterly separate from her human existence, but standing in Jorah's arms, seeing forever reflected in his silver eyes, the idea didn't seem frightening. It seemed like coming home. "I would want to finish my doctorate first," she said slowly, testing the words, "and probably publish a few papers. See my parents again, my friends who don't know about vampires, live some mortal life before I give it up. Of course. Take all the time you need." His smile was brilliant, transforming his face. "We have eternity, beloved. A few years or nothing. And you'll still want me when I'm 30 instead of 25? When I've got gray hair and wrinkles? I will want you at every age you choose to be." Jorah kissed her softly, reverently. "I will want you mortal, and I will want you immortal. I will want you in triumph and in ordinary moments. I will want you across a chessboard and across my throne and across eternity." Fiona laughed through her tears, giddy with relief and joy and the sheer impossibility of this entire situation. "You're very dramatic for someone who's supposed to be dignified and regal. You make me forget dignity. You make me forget everything except how much I love you." He spun her suddenly, vampire speed making the movement effortless, and they ended up laughing together in the middle of the impossible garden. "So what happens now?" Fiona asked when they'd settled, wrapped in his arms with her head against his chest. "Now that the trials are over and we've both admitted we're ridiculously in love?" "Now?" Jorah pressed a kiss to her hair. "Now you finish your studies, you live your mortal life, and every night you come to court and play chess with me." "Every night?" "Every night forever," he confirmed, echoing the promise he'd made that very first evening. "Because I demanded a rematch, and I'm never going to stop demanding them. You know I'll keep winning, right? I'm counting on it." His arms tightened around her. "You push me to be better, sharper, more than I've been in centuries. Why would I ever want that to stop? Even when I'm immortal and we have literal eternity? Especially then. I plan to spend forever learning from you, loving you, and occasionally beating you at chess when you get overconfident." Fiona tilted her head back to kiss him, pouring 3 weeks of tension and fear and desperate hope into the contact. When they broke apart, both smiling like idiots, she felt lighter than she had in months. "I should probably tell Sarah I'm dating the Vampire King," she mused, "and maybe warn my thesis advisor that I'll eventually be requesting a very extended leave of absence. We'll navigate it together," Jorah promised. "All of it, every complication and challenge, together." "Together," Fiona agreed. The next 5 years unfolded like the most beautiful game Fiona had ever played. She finished her doctorate with Jorah's unwavering support, publishing research that pushed the boundaries of predictive modeling. She maintained her human friendships, her connection to mortal life, even as she spent every night in the vampire court learning its intricate politics and ancient customs. She and Jorah were inseparable. They played chess every night without fail, their games evolving into complex battles that sometimes lasted days. Fiona won more often than not, but Jorah's victories became more frequent as he learned from her, adapting his centuries-old strategies with her innovative approaches. The court gradually accepted her presence, then her influence, until finally her position as the king's chosen consort was unquestionable. Vampires who'd once looked at her with disdain came to respect her strategic mind. Some even sought her counsel on disputes and decisions. Theron became an unexpected ally, his respect for her abilities overcoming his initial opposition. "You were right," he told her once, after she'd helped resolve a territorial dispute using pattern analysis. "The king is stronger with you beside him. I was a fool to think otherwise." Fiona spent time with her parents, careful conversations where she explained she'd found someone extraordinary, that she was happy beyond measure, that they shouldn't worry if her future looked different than expected. She never told them about vampires, but she thought her mother suspected something when Jorah finally met them and charmed them with 6 centuries of practiced courtesy. Sarah became her closest confidant, the bridge between her mortal life and immortal future. They spent long afternoons talking about everything and nothing, storing up memories against the day when Fiona would change. And slowly, carefully, Fiona made her peace with the decision she knew was coming. On the 5th anniversary of the night she'd beaten Jorah at chess in 9 moves, he took her to a private chamber she'd never seen before. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Just a room with a single window looking out onto stars she was fairly certain weren't real but were somehow perfectly visible underground anyway. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. No need to specify for what. Fiona had finished her doctorate 2 years ago. She'd published her research, seen her parents last week, spent time with Sarah just yesterday. She'd lived a full human life, accomplished her goals, said her goodbyes to the mortal world. She was 29 years old and ready to stop aging, ready to step fully into the immortal life she'd been preparing for. "I'm ready," she confirmed. The turning was less dramatic than she'd expected. Jorah explained every step, making sure she understood the process and the changes it would bring. There would be pain, yes, but he would be there through all of it. Her body would die and be reborn as something stronger, faster, immortal. She would need to feed on blood, would burn in sunlight, would carry all the traditional vampire weaknesses and strengths, but she would have forever with him. The actual transformation took 3 days. Jorah never left her side, holding her through the pain, whispering reassurance and love, being the anchor she needed as her human body broke and reformed. When Fiona finally opened her eyes as a vampire, the world had transformed. Everything was sharper, clearer, more vivid than she'd ever imagined. She could hear conversations happening rooms away, could smell individual scents layered in impossible complexity. Her body felt powerful in a way she'd never experienced, strength coiled in every muscle. And Jorah, looking down at her with those silver eyes full of love and relief, was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Hello, beloved," he murmured. "Welcome to eternity." Fiona's new vampire vision showed her details she'd never noticed before. The exact shade of silver in his eyes, the pattern of his white hair, the way he held himself with unconscious grace. She reached up to touch his face, marveling at her own speed and control. "I can see everything," she whispered. "What do you see?" "You. Forever. Us." Jorah kissed her then, and it was different as a vampire, better, the cool touch of his lips matched by her own transformed body. They fit together perfectly now, 2 immortals with eternity ahead of them. The coronation reaffirmation took place a month later, after Fiona had adjusted to her new existence. It was traditional ceremony combined with unprecedented change, as Jorah formally named her, not just consort, but co-ruler, equal partner in governing the court. "This is unusual," Lady Cassia observed, though she didn't sound disapproving. "We've never had a ruling pair before." "Then it's time we evolved," Jorah replied. He stood beside his throne, Fiona at his side, both of them dressed in formal attire that managed to be both ancient and modern. "Miss Harper taught me that adaptation is strength, not weakness. The court will be better for having 2 perspectives at its head instead of 1. The assembled vampires, hundreds of immortals spanning centuries of existence, bowed in acceptance. Even Theron, standing among the gathered nobles, inclined his head with genuine respect. After the ceremony, Jorah led Fiona back to their private chambers. A chessboard waited there, pieces already set, and Fiona laughed with pure joy at the sight. "Every night forever?" she asked, echoing his promise from 5 years ago. "Every night forever," Jorah confirmed. He took his seat at the black pieces, she at the white. "Though I should warn you, I've been practicing. I might actually win tonight." "You might," Fiona agreed, studying the board with her new vampire perception, seeing patterns and possibilities with even greater clarity than before. "But I've been practicing too." They played deep into the night, two immortals bent over a chessboard, circling truth and strategy and love across 64 squares. Fiona won eventually, but it took her 27 moves and every bit of skill she possessed. "Getting better," she acknowledged as Jorah's king toppled. "I have an excellent teacher." He reached across the board to take her hand, immortal fingers interweaving. "And eternity to improve. Rematch tomorrow night? And the night after that, and the night after that." His silver eyes held hers, infinite love and infinite promise. "Forever, beloved. Just like I said." Fiona smiled, squeezing his hand, her heart full despite no longer needing to beat. She'd come to the vampire court 5 years ago as a human graduate student, been challenged to chess by a king, and beaten him in 9 moves flat. She'd never imagined that toppled chess piece would lead to this: immortality, love, a crown shared with the most extraordinary being she'd ever met. But as she reset the board for another game, Jorah watching her with open adoration, Fiona couldn't imagine any other ending to their story. The pieces clicked into position. The game began again, and two immortal rulers, bound by love and strategy and the promise of endless tomorrows, played chess in a chamber beneath the city, while eternity stretched out before them like an infinite board, full of possibility and promise and forever. Checkmate, Fiona thought, but not an ending. Just the beginning of the longest, most beautiful game they'd ever play. Together, across centuries yet to come, they would keep playing, keep learning, keep loving. Two minds perfectly matched, two hearts beating as one, two souls intertwined across forever. Every night, without fail, they would return to this board and these pieces and this perfect partnership. Every night forever, just like he'd promised, just like she'd hoped from that very first toppled king.